Can I say something to you, Frank?
Frank.
You've been acting psychotically. What the hell? Why?
Well, I've been a little under strain. I got to play with Smales tomorrow.
Smales? The thing to do with Smales is, he bothers you. I'll take care of him. What you got to do to Smales is, you cut the hamstring on the back of his leg right at the bottom. He'll never play golf again. Because he goes back, his weight displacement goes back, and he stays there. All his weight's on his right foot. He's going to be pushing everything off to the right. He'll never come through on anything.
That would work, and I'm going to call you if I need that help.
It's the snobs against the slobs as a wealthy country club owner faces off against a brash real estate developer, a zen golfer, and a group of wild teen caddies. This week, we chat about universal words for poop, how the producers of Super Friends saved money, and that hooligan Tchaikovsky. Then we find out if Caddyshack stands the test of time.
Test of time, James and Alan have to say, do the movies you love still hold up today? James says gladiator with the glutton, Alan says as a father blah blah. It's the test of time, James and Alan have to say, do the movies you love still hold up today? Test of time, James and Alan have to say, do the movies you love still hold up today?
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Test of Time podcast. I'm James Brief, and joining me as always is Alan Noah.
Hi, that's me. How you doing there, James?
Good. You know, Al, what episode is this? We're reviewing Caddyshack today. Do you know what episode it is today?
I do. It is number 214.
214. That means that you have put together 214 episodes, and Al does all the post-production of this, and I bring this up because something happened a couple weeks ago, and we were recording the opener for Clueless. The opener being, today at Clueless, we discuss, the rich kids of Beverly Hills High, and one of the things we almost talked about was about college guys dating high school girls.
I think you pitched that line, and I was like, no, we can't use that because we use that in the opener for Heathers. And you were like, dude, who remembers, who cares? And I even said at that point, you're right. I know no one cares about this, but I do. So humor me. Let's think of a different line. And I don't remember what I replaced it with, but I was vindicated by friend of the show, Mike Kahn, who listeners might remember from our PCU episode.
He emailed us about an episode that was first aired on April 13th, 2018. And after Clueless, he said, this is the second time you guys talked about college people dating high school students. And you were totally right. And while the vast majority of people I still think will not get the reference, I applaud you, Al, for the dedication, and congratulations to you for remembering that you had already repeated a sentence from 2 years ago.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your appreciation. But you know what's funny is that we also almost recorded for the opener a line about Bugs Bunny and Pismo Beach, which we referenced in that episode. But I forgot that 1 week earlier in our Moonstruck episode, the opener had a line about what Bugs Bunny can teach you about opera. So I remembered an opening line from an episode 2 years ago, but I forgot about an opening line from the episode 1 week prior. I think that says something about my brain function and short-term memory and long-term memory. And I don't know, you're the doctor. You tell me what that means.
Actually, you're probably exactly right. It says something interesting about how you remember that specific thing. But yeah, you probably couldn't remember where you put your keys for a moment or something random that day. But kudos to you, the dedication.
Yeah, listen, I take this stuff seriously. I obsess over it, and maybe I should get a life. But hey, I care. I just care. And also, I'm just a little anal retentive. But James, let's talk about Caddyshack. And we were debating what movie to talk about this week. And I gotta be honest, I was really itching to do something with Bill Murray in it. I feel like we have been over-indexing on Tom Hanks this year. We did Turner and Hooch and League of Their Own and That Thing You Do. And it's like, we haven't done any Bill Murray movies in ages. And I'm like, I want to do a movie with Bill Murray. And this is not necessarily a Bill Murray movie, but it has Bill Murray in it. And I had the DVD and I was like, let's talk about Caddyshack. Had you seen this movie before?
I had actually never seen this film until well after college. I mean, a couple years after college. And then, I heard about this great film, Caddyshack. I just remember being underwhelmed, and then I never saw it again. But I always kind of wanted to give it another shot. So this is actually the second time I've ever seen Caddyshack.
Wow.
However, I'm going to confess something. I had seen many times as a child, just because for some reason I'm guessing the broadcast rights were incredibly cheap.
Oh, no, don't say it.
I had seen many times, yes, I'm going to say it, what is known as one of the worst sequels ever, Caddyshack 2. So that is possibly why I had never seen Caddyshack, because I was like, this movie is really stupid. And Caddyshack 2, it has at its surface kind of some of the similar plot line of like, it's the old rich people at the country club versus like the wacky nouveau riche guy. But the films, I will say, are leagues apart.
Jackie Mason is in 2, right?
That's correct. Yeah, it's Jackie Mason and Jonathan Silverman, who is he's basically the Danny character.
Right. And Chevy Chase is in that. He's like the only person who showed up for that sequel, I believe.
He makes what is very clearly a scene that ties this together. Otherwise, it is completely, it has no ties to it. It's like, there was that Mean Girls sequel.
No.
Yeah, there was a Mean Girls sequel like made for TV, and I think it has something like Tim Meadows is in it to kind of bridge the continuity. But, Tina Fey and, Lindsay Lohan and, Rachel McAdams, they had nothing to do with it. But it was one scene, and I remember him being in it. And Dan Aykroyd is the wacky groundskeeper that has to get the gopher. And I had kind of figured, okay, like I had seen this film and was not impressed.
So let's talk about Caddyshack, the first one, not Caddyshack 2. So this movie centers around the snobby Bushwood Country Club. Danny Noonan is a local teenager who works as a caddy at the club to raise money for his college education. He primarily caddies for Ty Webb, a zen-loving golfer who never keeps score. A real estate developer named Al Cervic starts coming to the club, as he's thinking about buying the land and turning it into condos. Al annoys Judge Smales, the club's uptight co-founder. Meanwhile, Danny is lusting after Judge Smales' niece while also trying to kiss up to the judge so he can get a college scholarship. Also, the club's crazy groundskeeper, Carl Spackler, is locked in a battle of wits against a gopher. Just random sidebar on that gopher. My dad has like an animatronic gopher that's like a thing we bought at a Spencer Gifts like a million years ago. You push a button and it dances around to I'm All Right by Kenny Loggins. I'm pretty sure he still has that in his house.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So this movie came out in 1980. I think we missed the official 40-year anniversary by a little bit, but I believe this was a pretty big hit on its release, right?
Oh, yeah. This little film on a $6 million budget, directed by Harold Ramis, and he had already been
his
involved.
First movie.
Yeah, his first movie. He had already been involved in Animal House, so he'd had some Hollywood exposure before, and he'd done some other stuff, but this was his first big film, and it was released on July 25th, 1980. This film opened at a strong number 2 with $3.1 million, earning half of its budget back, but what, of course, was number 1 in its 10th week at number 1 in 1980.
The Empire Strikes Back.
That is correct. The $6 million film wound up grossing $40 million, so it did very well. It was actually number 14 on 1980's domestic box office, so it did very well.
I can believe it. I mean, this is a beloved movie, and people always talk about it. People always reference it. People always quote it. I think maybe more people of our dad's generation I mean, I mentioned he has the gopher. He definitely loves the movie. But the movie starts off with Danny, who is one of the caddies, and he has this huge family. I totally forgot this opening scene where it's like him at home and he's got a million brothers and sisters and maybe cousins, because like the dad is talking to a kid at the breakfast table and is like, "Who are you?" I don't know exactly what the joke there is, that this family has so many kids that the dad doesn't recognize one. It wasn't really all that funny.
But it does establish that this guy, Danny, is a working class guy. And we find out that he's working for $30 a day as a caddy at the local Bushwood Country Club. And he's trying to earn money so that he can go off to college. And college is $8,000 a year.
If I could whistle, I would have just made a whistle sound. Yeah, not so bad. And then we see him at the club and he's talking to Ty Webb, who's played by Chevy Chase. He's talking about how if he can't go to college, he'll end up working at a lumber yard. And Ty is like, "Well, I own 2 lumber yards." And this is where we also start to see a little bit of Ty's sort of Zen attitude, where he's saying, "Be the ball." That's like his advice about golf. And also he's really, really good at golf. So maybe there's something to it. But be the ball is definitely a thing that my dad used to say when we would like play catch. Be the ball.
Oh, I mean, this is the kind of film that was quoted by not my dad, but our dad's generation. This is a very important film to them. So
yes.
Chevy Chase, who's also at the time, he is a hugely successful guy. He's been on Saturday Night Live for several years, and he's one of the big stars of it.
He has only been on Saturday Night Live for 1 year. People forget that. Chevy Chase was on Saturday Night Live for the first season and only the first season. He quit after the first season. And do you know who he was replaced by?
Was it Eddie Murphy?
No, Eddie Murphy joined in, I believe, 1980 or 81. It was Bill Murray who replaced Chevy Chase.
Oh, okay.
And there was actually a little bit of bad blood between Bill Murray and Chevy Chase. And Chevy Chase came back to SNL and they actually got into like a fist fight, kind of. They said it was like not really much of a fight. But they patched things up after that and they appeared in this movie together. And it was kind of a big deal, because people knew that story that they had fought before. But fun fact.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't hear about that. Yeah, Chevy Chase was a big star, and he wound up being quite successful, at least throughout the certainly the early to mid 80s. And Bill Murray would, of course, go on to big success, box office in the 80s, kind of go, a little more indie after Groundhog Day. But he's certainly been successful now consistently for 40 years since 1980. Harold Ramis, the late Harold Ramis, people know him best as Egon from the Ghostbusters films, but he wound up directing Bill Murray again in Groundhog Day. So very successful guy.
Well, also Rodney Dangerfield was not well known outside of stand-up comedy circles when he was cast in this movie. Like, comedians knew him, loved him, revered him. He was a legend, but he hadn't really done much acting. So him being cast in this movie was either weird or a stroke of genius, I guess, depending on how you look at it.
That's really interesting you say that, and that makes a lot of sense now to something I've heard before. Howard Stern had talked about him, and Rodney was kind of bitter that he had only found success very late in life. Totally makes sense with what you're saying, that comedians knew him and thought he was hysterical, but he didn't make it big until, I guess, this is probably what did it, Caddyshack, and then that propelled him to, back to school and then all that success.
Right. I think the only other movie that he really starred in that we will review is Ladybugs. He does have a small role in Natural Born Killers, but he didn't star in a lot of movies. I think actually maybe in 1980, one of the bigger names in this movie is Ted Knight, who plays Judge Smales. He was somebody that people knew, people loved, people respected. I really don't know him from a lot of things personally, but he was in the Mary Tyler Moore Show. And fun fact about him, while I pulled up his IMDb page, he was the narrator on Super Friends. So he was the guy who said, Meanwhile, at the Hall of Justice.
That is awesome. That kind of means that it was probably just so easy where he was on the lot and they're like, hey, why don't you just go over to Studio C and, they'll pay you $500 an hour to just read these lines about Superman.
Anytime I think of that show, that's all I can think of. Meanwhile, at the Hall of Justice. Do you think he had to record that line over and over and over again, or he just recorded it once and they just used it a million times?
Whatever was cheaper.
Then he only recorded it once. But let's talk about Bill Murray in this movie, Carl Spackler. When you're introduced to him, he's gawking at these old women who are playing golf, and he's like stroking the ball cleaning machine in a not very subtle motion. And he's imagining having a conversation with one of the women, and he's like, "You're lean and you're mean and you're not too far between," which I'm not sure exactly what that means, but it's clearly an innuendo. And then the head groundskeeper tells him to kill all of the gophers, but he has a very thick Scottish accent. And he's like, wait, if I kill all the golfers, won't I go to jail? He's like, not golfers, gophers. It's just him being goofy, and pretty much every line he says in this movie is quotable. Again, probably to our dad's generation, more so than us.
Every single line he says is probably funnier than the way anyone else would have delivered it. Chevy Chase is a funny guy, but had their roles been reversed, Chevy Chase would not have played Carl Spackler better than Bill Murray. Bill Murray was a great guy at this time for this role.
Exactly. The part where he's talking about how he was caddying for the Dalai Lama. He says it's the 12th son of the Dalai Lama, which makes sense because it was 40 years ago. Now we're up to the 14th. But he says that he asked the Dalai Lama for a tip, and the Dalai Lama said no, but when you die on your deathbed, you will receive total consciousness. So I got that going for me, which is nice. And that is one of those lines that, yeah, everyone says, everyone knows, even if you just know the last part. So I got that going for me, which is nice.
And, I definitely did not remember that line from the one time I saw this, but that is a very popular meme. So you see that all over.
Yeah.
So I knew I figured it's from this movie, but I didn't know whether it was this movie or Stripes, which is the other Bill Murray movie that I've never seen.
That one came out in 1981, so we can review it next year for its 40th anniversary. That one stars Harold Ramis and Bill Murray together.
Ah.
Yeah. Then we go back to Danny and the other caddies. Danny has a nemesis, this other caddy. They get into a fight because a Coke costs 50 cents, and the other guy is really mad about that. The guy who's in charge of the caddies, Lou, who's played by Brian Doyle Murray, who co-wrote this movie and is Bill Murray's half-brother, they said he's having trouble at the track, so that's why they've raised the price of a Coke to a whopping 50 cents. But like they get into a fight and they smash the scumball machine, and then Lou has to come out and say, all right, listen, quit it, you guys. You guys are terrible caddies. All you do is smoke grass. You're terrible at your jobs. But oh, by the way, some caddy died and he was a good kid. So now if anyone else wants the scholarship, because he had the scholarship, he was in college, it's now open. Kiss up to Judge Smales and you could get the scholarship.
Yeah, and that's kind of driving Danny's plot line. And it's also one of these 80s things that you really see that, I guess it's from the boomer generation. And our parents, when they graduated high school, there were basically three things they could have done. They could have gone to the army, they could have gone to work, or they could go to college. But generally, for our generation, it was, were you going to college? And if someone wasn't going to college, they probably had a pretty good reason why they're not going to college. Like in the 80s, and we've discussed this in other films, going to college is your ticket to success. It's basically like what today getting into Harvard we would consider. It's not a golden ticket like you're, guaranteed $1 million, but this right now, you're on the path to the American dream by getting into Harvard. And that's kind of what it was back then. Like, I'm going to go to college and study to be, and whatever you decide at 17, that is definitely the grad school you're going to get into, the career you're going to do, at least at this point. And to an extent, they weren't wrong.
And I mean, I guess it's a good thing about Danny. He wants to do well in life. And so he immediately starts kissing up to Judge Smales. That's the Ted Knight character, who is apparently a co-founder of this country club, which I don't think they say until pretty close to the end of the movie when he's talking to Tide. He says, "I founded this club with your father." I was like, oh, okay. I guess he's the co-founder. I didn't really know that going in, but whatever. And Judge Smales kind of dismisses Danny when he's saying, oh, I really want to go to college, but it's pretty expensive. And the judge says, well, the world needs ditch diggers too. It's a really great way of showing the judge's character and also just in general, the sort of attitude that some rich people have towards poor people. Like, yeah, you're not going to succeed. Oh, well.
Yeah, this Judge Smales guy, you want to kind of say he's over the top, and no, he's actually, I think he's a pretty accurate, like, you know, rich, racist, anti-Semitic jerk at a country club. And there are country clubs that completely still exist like this today. I found his character to be a little more compelling than I might have as a child, or maybe even, 10, 15 years ago when I saw this for the first time, when I thought this character maybe might have been a little more over the top.
I think he borders on caricature and like cartoon villain, but I do think that you do have a point that he is the kind of prick that you would see at a country club. And it works. And Ted Knight plays the role so well. I mean, you just hate the guy. He's making a joke to his buddy at the club who's a bishop. And he's like, hey, did you hear the joke about the Jew, the Catholic, and the colored boy who go to heaven? And then there's a black employee who works there. And he starts like, what did he say? Colored boy, I'll kill that asshole. And, you get the sense that, yeah, he's got the three guys at the club who he plays golf with who presumably like him, but everyone else is going to be talking about what a prick he is behind his back.
Oh, yeah. And this guy today, he would just be the guy that he would say something like, oh, I work with black people, and there's a black lawyer at my law firm or in the hospital I work at. And then he would say these lines like, but I got a great joke about the black kid who did this. This guy exists. And this guy is also dangling essentially a scholarship for Danny. And when I was younger, I must have thought that scholarships were debated like, the great debates of the founding fathers of who should get this. And, look at this essay, but she has 3 letters from these people. Yes, but he's an Eagle Scout. And I've learned that it's going to be a board and they're going to have like more important stuff to do. All right, now the scholarships. One guy's going to push this thing. So I think it's very believable that this guy can offer the scholarship to Danny if he does his bidding. However, I think this guy would have also been totally full of shit and would have told Danny, yeah, win for the scholarship, and probably would have promised this to someone else too and given it to whoever was more important to him.
Right. I mean, he clearly doesn't care all that much about who gets the stupid scholarship. But then we meet this other character, Al Cervic, played by Rodney Dangerfield. I completely forgot that this character's name was Al. I think they only say it like once or twice. I mean, you just associate this guy as Rodney Dangerfield. But he shows up to this club and he is just loud and boisterous and he's making fun of everything and everybody. He's with this Asian guy. And as they walk in, he says, I hear this place is restricted, Wang, so don't tell them you're Jewish, which is a really funny line because, you wouldn't expect that the Asian guy is Jewish, and you would expect that maybe if it's restricted, just the fact that he's Asian would be bad. I don't know. That kind of made me laugh.
Oh, that line was great.
It's very, very funny. And then he's walking through the store and he's like, oh, give me 6 of these and 4 of those and 2 of these. And he's like, oh, that's a terrible hat. That's the worst hat ever. It must come with a bowl of soup. And then right behind him is Judge Smales wearing that hat. And he's like, oh, it looks good on you though. And then he does like the famous thing that Rodney Dangerfield did with his eyes, like kind of, ooh. And, immediately Judge Smales hates him. It's a great introduction to the character where in 30 seconds, all you need to know about this guy.
Oh, and he's got this golf bag that he carries around that is twice the size of any other golf bag. It's got hydraulic pumped golf clubs where they just pop out of the golf bag into his hand. He's got a stereo system in there, and at one point he gets a good shot or something, and he says, "It's party time," and he turns on, and I got a clip of the song right here. Al, can you hit it?
Any way you want it, that's the way you need it. Any way you want it.
Yeah, exactly. By Chicago.
Oh,
I'm
my
kidding.
God.
I know it's Journey.
That's not funny, man. That's not funny.
Yes. Back to this bag. It's got the stereo. It's also got a built-in keg for beer. Mm-hmm. It's got a television. It has a phone. And it even has these wacky clubs that, like, he can use this scope with a little computer in it to give him the perfect shot. This guy, he's nouveau riche, and he's built up an empire from nothing because he's, your steak and potatoes kind of guy that just made a lot of money. And he knows what he's doing. He's a smart guy, but he's not like a Rockefeller kind of money, and they don't like that he's changing the rules.
Right. And he develops land and he owns a lot of like condos. That's sort of a thing he's talking about, is that maybe this country club should be a condo. He says something that country clubs and cemeteries are bad real estate because nobody wants to be buried anymore. Like it's bad for the environment or something like that. It was kind of a weird line, but meanwhile, back with the caddies, there is this kind of love story. Danny has this girlfriend, Maggie, who is this adorable girl. She's got a really thick Irish accent, and they're kind of maybe in love. Maybe it's just lust. Who knows? But Danny is now gawking at Judge Smales' niece, who is this young woman, Lacey. And she is beautiful, and all of the caddies love her. Some of the golfers love her too, including Ty. And there's a big party at the 4th of July, and everyone's staring at her. Maggie yells at Danny, like, stay away. I think she calls her like the whore of Fifth Avenue or something because she was in school in New York City. But she's also flirting with Ty pretty heavily.
Yeah, this character, I almost feel like she had a bigger role in some earlier version of this script because this Lacey character doesn't seem to have any role except to just to be a romantic object for a couple of the characters.
Yeah, I think that's fair. She's basically just lusted after by everyone. She was also in Tron. I really remember nothing about that movie.
We'll review that at some point.
Yeah, eventually. We'll get to Tron.
I think that Disney's going to revive that franchise somehow. But there's another character that we have not introduced yet, and that is the famous gopher, which I knew, of course, from Caddyshack 2, but it turns out was also famous from Caddyshack 1.
Yes. I was watching the documentary about Caddyshack that was on the DVD. It was the special feature. It was half an hour, whatever. I have the DVD. Here, I'll show you. It's called, what is it called? It's called The 19th Hole, featuring outtakes, other rare footage, and reminiscences by Chevy Chase, Harold Ramis, and others. But they were talking about the special effects that they used for the gopher. Apparently, like, they went to ILM, and the special effects were done by John Dykstra's company. They did like the lightning and some of the other special effects, but the gopher, they like spent a lot of money on, and Chevy Chase was joking in the documentary on why they spend so much money on the gopher. They should have paid me more.
That's a funny joke.
Yeah, that was pretty funny. And Harold Ramis was like, honestly, I wasn't so sure about how the gopher was going to work and how it was going to look, but it actually looks pretty good. And I mean, I think for 1980 effects, it's fine. I mean, it's like an animatronic puppet. It looks okay. I don't think it's particularly realistic, but I don't think it really matters. It's just a gag. It's funny.
It's something that kind of strings the film together because there's not too much of a coherent plot line driving everything, but the gopher is a consistent foe of Carl, and he's always chasing it and kind of getting outsmarted because the head landscaper, who's do you think the Scottish groundskeeper Willie is modeled after this guy? He's fantastic, but we never see him for more than like a single scene.
Maybe. He could have been the inspiration for groundskeeper Willie. That's definitely possible. And Carl has a line about the only good varmint poontang is dead varmint poontang, which is a weird thing to talk about, varmint poontang, but Carl's a weird guy. I also want to talk about the scene where Ty is talking to Danny about college, and Ty is kind of saying that college isn't the most important thing in the world. And he's saying, you know, I'm going to tell you a story about a guy who could have been a great golfer, could have been amazing, but instead he went to college and he got kicked out of college. And do you know who that person was? And like, you think it's Ty, but Danny is trying to be a smartass and he goes, I don't know, Bob Hope. And Ty says, no, it was my roommate, Mitch Cumstain, which is a really, really funny fake name. I had a friend a long time ago who used to use that as like his alias. He would just go by Mitch Cumstain.
I mean, it was a funny joke, but it was almost a profound statement by saying, you know, college is a great thing to do if you're going to do nothing. But it was almost going to say, like, if you have a great idea like I did, like you start a company, maybe you don't have to do that. But then he just says the reason why college isn't for everyone is because this guy died halfway through senior year.
No, he didn't die. He got kicked out of college because he was night putting around at night with the dean's daughter. That's the joke.
Oh, yes, right. So that's why you shouldn't go to college, because you can get kicked out if you mess around with the dean's daughter. I think you can get kicked out of any job if you mess around with the boss's daughter.
This is probably true.
But it was still funny.
Yes, it is funny. Maybe a little bit less funny is when Ty is like hitting all of the golf balls, like kind of blindfolded, and he's not really looking, and he's saying, no. And that is a thing that people quote and people say a lot. I assume people say that when they golf. I do not golf, so I don't know. But it's just one of those weird little ad-libbed things that's become a pop culture thing.
All I could think of is Jackie Mason. He says it in the second film, and he goes, na 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 na. He does it in his own, like, you know, Jewish Yiddish accent, which is his own thing, but it's definitely not the Chevy Chase na 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 na. And I could only hear a mix of both of them, and neither of them wound up being funny.
Yeah. Ty has a line where he also says, thank you very little in this scene, which again, that's such a dad thing to say. My dad says it. It's like, okay, I get it. Usually you say thank you very much. This is the opposite.
Instead of goodbye, bad bye.
Yeah, it's not that funny.
Yeah, but Rodney Dangerfield's Al character is really heating things up with the judge. He challenges the judge to a $1,000 bet that he would miss a putt, and gambling is totally illegal at Bushwood, but the judge still bets him, and then he does lose, and he throws a club, and then the judge is like, I didn't do anything, it was him.
And then Danny takes the fall. He says, I should have checked the grips. And then the judge appreciates Danny and says, well, you might just get that scholarship. That was very nice of you. Meanwhile, like, the judge could have killed that lady. Like, he throws his golf club towards this restaurant, hits this woman in the head. And then, of course, he doesn't take responsibility for it. But it's like, he could have done some serious damage to this woman.
You know, at best I understand he's also a judge, so maybe he doesn't exactly want to admit he did something wrong. But, I mean, I guess he does offer to buy them lunch. So he says, lunch is on me. So, you know, that's his way of, country club apologizing, I guess.
I guess. Another famous scene we got to talk about is the pool scene. All of the caddies are allowed to run wild on Caddy Day. Caddy Day takes place only between 1 and 1:15. So they only give the caddies 15 minutes, but they all jump in the pool, and someone brings a baby Ruth into the pool and it's floating around and it looks like a turd. So everyone freaks out. They refer to it as duty. I don't know of how common that word is anymore. It just kind of made me smile. It just made me think of like being a little kid. That's what you called poop, duty.
There are very few things in medicine that I can communicate with people that don't speak any language, but like baby, caca, how many caca, caca, doo-doo, these are just universal words. So yeah, duty, I'd say that word holds up.
But you said caca and doo-doo, but duty is also on that list?
Yes, duty's still on there. It's kind of the funny way, but I don't think necessarily a 16-year-old guy would say duty. He'd obviously say, shit, or, there's a piece of crap, or like a turd. He
Right.
could say that, but duty's still a word. I guess even kids would say it.
Yeah.
They do wind up draining the entire pool because there was a piece of duty in there. That was funny because, I assume poop happens, especially if you're going to have kids in a pool. Like, that's just going to happen. You drain the entire pool? No, I assume you get it out and you treat the pool. And maybe you let the filters go, but I don't think they drain it.
I don't know.
Do you drain the entire pool?
At a snobby country club like that, where everybody saw it and everybody's going to be talking about it.
That's true.
I
Yeah.
could see it. I mean, if you're talking about like a public pool somewhere and like no one really pays any attention, they kind of grab it and throw it out real quick. Yeah, maybe you don't drain the pool. But in a situation like this, I could kind of see it.
No, you're right. You're absolutely right. At Bushwood, they would have drained the entire pool.
Yeah. There is the sex scene between Ty and Lacey. It has its comedic moments. She says that, my uncle says you've got a screw loose. And Ty says, oh yeah, your uncle molests collies, which he says very fast, but it's pretty funny. Like she takes a shot of tequila and says, ugh, this is terrible. And he's like, oh no, you're just doing it wrong. And he like licks his hand, puts the salt on his hand, licks the salt, and then throws the tequila shot over his shoulder. So yeah, then the tequila doesn't taste terrible because he throws it over his shoulder. I don't know. There's a couple of little gags like that made me laugh.
Yeah, and there's one part when she asks, were you in Vietnam? And he says, no, gay.
He doesn't say gay, though.
No. And yeah, that's very test of time because that's absolutely true. If one way you could get out of Vietnam was to say that you were gay. And, of course, he follows this by oiling her back and himself. And then, they do wind up having sex.
And then because Danny has gotten on the judge's good side, the judge invites him to the yacht club. There's a test of time joke where someone points at him and says, you look like Dick Cavett. I don't get that reference, but okay. I mean, I get that he looks stupid in his full sailor gear, but he's definitely trying to kiss up to the judge, but it doesn't really work out so well because Al shows up on his boat. And like we were saying about the judge and the golf club, Al definitely could have killed a lot of people when he's like trying to be funny on his boat. Like he crashes into a pier where there are people eating. He rams into the judge's boat and then kind of just barely touches it, but then drops the anchor through it. So that's kind of funny.
He rams through a regular rowboat that someone's on?
Yeah. I mean, like he definitely could have killed a lot of people.
No question about it. And you assume that there's a huge propeller behind this yacht. So even the guy that the rowboat goes past, like he could have maimed him. It's a zany scene, but honestly more of like a cartoon kind of thing.
Yeah. It is.
Because you're like, yeah, he clearly crashed into a judge's boat. And the judge references later, cost me $8,000 worth of repairs. Like, unfortunately, in our litigious society, I immediately was like, well, everyone at the marina, and marinas, probably some rich people at a marina, everyone is seeing this. Like, he's going to pay him.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
It's not going to cost the judge $8,000, But there's another scene with Lacey, and she and Danny are hanging out at the judge's house, because remember, Lacey is the judge's niece. And they're hanging out, one thing leads to another, and there is some love happening between Danny and Lacey. And this scene, as opposed to the Chevy Chase love scene, this one has a significant amount of nudity.
Right. Also, in the documentary, she was talking about how she was definitely not going to do nudity in the movie. She told Harold Ramis that she wasn't going to do nudity, and Harold Ramis is like, okay, if you don't want to, that's fine. But then some producer called her and was like, no, you better do it. So she did. And it's a little bit weird because it almost feels like it's supposed to be kind of romantic, which it isn't, because Lacey has had sex with Ty and Danny has Maggie, who's his kind of sort of girlfriend. And Danny and Lacey aren't like a couple that you're rooting for in any way. So it's a little bit weird that they make this as sort of like a tender lovemaking scene, I thought.
Yeah, it's something I've discussed this before in other films. I really think that this was just kind of a gratuitous nudity scene because there wasn't home video back then, and really the only ways to see a naked woman was in a Playboy magazine, but of course that's just pictures. And honestly, the only way to see a naked woman on film is to go to an adult theater, which is either inaccessible to most people because most people don't live in a city that might have it, or you just might not want to. So you would see a lot more just gratuitous sex scenes.
Well, I think also just from a test of time perspective, nudity was looked at differently for actresses because before home video really caught on, if you were nude in a movie, people would only see it if they saw it in the theater, and then that was it. It didn't like live forever necessarily.
Right.
Whereas now with home video and the internet and everything, if you are ever naked in a movie, that image will live on Google forever. And people know that. So in the Caddyshack documentary, Cindy Morgan, that actress, I think she said something like she didn't want to pose in Playboy because then it would just exist forever on people's nightstands or whatever. But to do it in a movie where it would happen real quick, why not? You know, it was just a different mentality then.
I think that's fascinating that she thought that a movie would be, just passing in the night, like a live radio broadcast that's not recorded. You just assume, if you flash somebody in New Orleans, 30 years ago, you probably assume that, that would be one and done. But today, if anyone displays any kind of nudity anywhere, just assume there's a camera everywhere.
Right. So getting back to Danny and Lacey, after they have sex, the judge comes home and he's obviously pissed off because Al destroyed his boat. And then he finds Danny in bed with his niece and he chases him around the house.
Well, not just a chase around the house. He swings at him with the golf club, almost kills him.
I mean, he's had a rough day, but yes, a judge should not attempt murder on a teenager. And the next day, the judge talks to him at the country club, and Danny thinks he's like in trouble and he's not going to get the scholarship now. But the judge is like, just keep it quiet. She's my niece. Let's just not go talking about it.
What he's trying to say is, let's not go talking about that my niece is, the word they would have used back then, a slut, Like, that's what he doesn't want getting around. It's not that there's some bad thing about this Lacey girl. She's an of-age woman who's basically had sex with two people, totally consenting. But that's the big secret that he needs to keep quiet, that his niece is not a virgin.
Right. And then he has another conversation with Maggie, who thinks that she's pregnant. And then I really kind of hated Danny. I'm like, this girl clearly likes you and you're sleeping with someone else, you jerk. But then Maggie says, well, I think it's your baby, but I'm not totally sure. And then you're like, okay, so this is kind of like an open relationship, not too serious kind of situation. They're just kids and, it's not like either of them was cheating on the other. So that's all right. But just skipping ahead to later, Maggie is not pregnant. So it's all good. But meanwhile, The judge still hates Al. They kind of like come to blows in the country club. I really, really like what Ty is doing in that scene where the judge goes to like strangle Al and Ty is like, break it up. And he just grabs the doctor who's like the judge's friend who's not involved in the physical fight at all. And Ty like puts him in a headlock. Like he's not helping in the situation at all, but I just kind of thought that was funny. And really quickly, very kind of quietly, Al says the thing. I don't know. Did you catch it? Did you hear Rodney Dangerfield say it?
What, I get no respect?
Yeah, it's not like I got no respect at all. There's some variation of I get no respect around here.
Oh, nice. I did miss it.
It's very, very quick. Honestly, I only caught it because I had the captions on, but he does say the thing. And then they make this big bet where Al and Ty are going to go up against the judge and the doctor, and they're going to bet all of this money because the judge just hates Al, and Al is kind of a competitive guy, and he seems to be a compulsive gambler, and Ty hates the judge also, even though he doesn't like keeping score or competing or any of that stuff because he's very zen. He kind of just decides, you know what? I hate you, judge. I'm in. Then there's this big scene between Ty and Carl, and it doesn't really relate to the plot, but you figure they just had to do it because they have Bill Murray and they have Chevy Chase in a movie together. And this is the only time they're in a scene together. And in the documentary, they say that they were like, oh, wait, we need to put these guys in a scene together. And I think it was Chevy Chase and Bill Murray and Harold Ramis went to like a diner one night and just wrote the script in like half an hour and then shot it the next day. I gotta say, I was a little disappointed by this scene. It wasn't as funny as I was hoping it was going to be.
No, I did only note one funny line in that, and that's when Carl's saying that everyone around there hates him, and Ty says, no, people don't say that about you, as far as you know. There was another scene in that I thought was, kind of like amusing, but Carl says that he's growing his own hybrid of grass, which you think is like, this beautiful like landscaping grass for the country club, and he goes, yeah, it's great because it has great something for golfing, but you can also smoke it and get high. And he offers Ty a huge joint full of this grass, and then he yells, cannonball, and gives him a shot of some kind of hard liquor, to which Ty coughs, and then he says, cannonball, and then gives him another hit of the weed, and then more of the liquor. And my guess is that this scene was reenacted in many a frat house in the 1980s.
Is that a thing that people still do? A cannonball?
I have no idea. I'd never heard of it, but I know that Caddyshack is the kind of thing that people used to quote every line, and I'm just like, this is the kind of line everyone would quote. Like, if you had seen it with your friends and you're like a dumb 20-year-old.
That sounds fair.
Yeah, but the film's climax, it basically comes down to this bet, the grudge between Al and the judge.
Yeah, so it all comes down to this golf game, and Al kind of sucks. He says he's having the worst game of his life, and Ty is doing okay, but the judge and his doctor friend are really doing well. They're winning. The judge taunts Al, and then he doubles the bet, and then Al, quote unquote, gets hurt. Basically, he hits the golf ball into a tree, and it bounces back, and it hits him in the arm, and he's like, oh no, I think I hurt my arm. Oh, well, I guess it's a draw. And they're like, no, you need to find a replacement. So Ty chooses Danny, the caddy. And the judge is like, oh, Danny, I wouldn't do that. You want that scholarship, right? And Ty says, no, do it. I'll make it worth your while if we win. And so Danny is like, okay, sure, why not? Seems like a pretty big risk, but whatever. It all comes down to Danny has to make this one last shot, and if he makes it, it will be a tie, but if he misses it, they will lose. But then Al makes another double or nothing bet, all about if Danny makes this one last shot. All the pressure's on Danny. He makes the shot. It's really, really close, but the ball stops right before it goes in the hole. But Meanwhile, on the other side of the country club, Carl versus the gopher is still happening. Carl has put all of these explosives in all of the gopher holes. He hits the detonator. There's huge explosions everywhere, and the ground shakes just enough for Danny's ball to go into the hole. And then they win the bet.
Yeah, and it's played over my favorite piece of classical music. It's a song that actually revolutionized music. And imagine you're in Eastern Europe. The old people are used to like, a violin and cellos at the symphony. And then this guy, Tchaikovsky, this hooligan comes and he does this tune that's very nice. And then what does he do? He puts freaking cannons into it. It's a fantastic song, and Harold Ramis, or the editor, whoever did it, he timed it wonderfully, I'll say, with the explosions. That it works very, very well. I think the explosion, while the entire storyline is a little silly, I thought that the explosion was kind of satisfying. Even though I wasn't necessarily rooting for Danny in any way, I was rooting for Al.
I gotta think that's the first time anyone has ever referred to Tchaikovsky as a hooligan. I mean, I don't know, but I'm going to assume that that's the first time in history anyone has ever said that.
He put cannons into classical music, which back then they probably just called music, but he put cannons into it. I mean, also free for them to use because the rights are quite old and expired.
Right. That's a very good point. So the judge refuses to pay Al, and Al has a couple of goons that he sends after him and help the judge find his checkbook. And then he turns to the whole crowd of people that have been watching and says,
"Hey, everybody, we're all gonna get laid."
And that's the last line of dialogue in the movie. Then you see the gopher start dancing. He didn't get blown up by Carl. Hooray. And he starts dancing to I'm All Right by Kenny Loggins. Would you like to hear a clip of that song, James?
Would I?
I don't know. Would you?
Yes. Roll it, Al.
All right. I'm all right. Nobody worry about me. Why you got to give me a fight? Can't you just let it be? Dip, 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 dip. So that is the end of 1980s Caddyshack. James, do you think the movie stands the test of time?
I'm going to say first what I really liked about this film. Some of the cast members. Rodney Dangerfield is fantastic. He's a one-liner comic, so he's not your Seinfeld, your John Mulaney. You're not these kind of guys that will tell you, "So I was on the subway, and did you ever notice this happens?" No, he just does one-liners one after the other. The line with Wang I thought was fantastic. Like, "Hey, Wang, it's a restricted club, so don't tell him you're Jewish." I thought that's hysterical. There's a dinner party at one point when he just goes and rubs the shoulders of a priest who's wearing the collar and has the whole priest garb, and he goes, "Hey, Rabbi, how's it going?" I think he's very funny. When you held up the DVD, you were probably looking at the back or something. I got a glimpse of the front cover, and look at Rodney. Look at that picture of him. Turn around for yourself, Al. That's a funny face. Chevy Chase, also, he's very funny in this film, too. He has a lot of good lines. There's a line when the judge goes to him, "How come you don't keep score?" And he's like, "I don't really care about score." And he goes to him, "Well, how do you measure up to other golfers?" And he says, "Height." That's a great Chevy Chase line, but also it's perfect Chevy Chase delivery. And I say that with personal experience because many years ago, I was in Ithaca, New York for my brother's graduation. And we were just in some random park during the day. And there he is, Chevy Chase. I'm like 15 or something. So I'm totally starstruck. I don't want to go over to him. But my brother, he's a graduate. He's going to go over to him. And my brother goes to him and he goes, "Hi, Mr. Chase, what brings you to Ithaca?" And Chevy Chase, without missing a beat, goes, "Airplane." And I started cracking up. It was so funny, just the way he said it. And I just thought he was very funny. And he's good in this film.
I've met Chevy Chase.
Yeah. Did you think he was funny?
I did. He was very nice. I met him at the NBC 75th anniversary. He brought his shark costume from SNL, and he would like knock on the door and he would pretend to be a shark. He had that original costume, and I have a picture of me in it. Like, I wasn't supposed to try it on, but I did, and I took a picture. He has a reputation of like annoying people and getting into fights with people he's worked with, but he was nice to me. He was nice to you and your brother. One of the guys I worked with at SNL told this story about how he was incredibly generous, and I think like bought him a piano or a guitar or something. I don't know. I've heard things about him being a very nice guy too.
Well, okay. We're here for positive stuff.
Exactly.
We're not, there we go. Another thing, there's a funny scene that I really like where the bishop, it's raining out and everyone says, time to go in, everyone. And no one's going to caddy for him except Crazy Carl. He's willing to caddy for him, and it's raining and they keep going. The bishop is having the greatest game of his life, like hole in one or, birdies, and he's doing great. And then he goes on the 18th hole, and if he sinks this, he's going to have like the best game of his life, and he misses it, and he just looks up at God and just screams, "Rat farts," and is struck by lightning, and I guess presumably dies.
No, he's alive. You see him later in the movie.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
Okay. I just thought he died because he was also saying, "The good Lord will not let anything happen to me." So I thought it was actually funnier that he died there.
No, because in the later scene, he's like rambling and he's like drinking a lot. And the judge is like, "I think you're cut off." And he's like, "Don't tell me what to do. I'm a bishop." And he says like, "There is no God."
Oh, so it's probably because he was struck by lightning. I didn't quite get that was him.
Yes.
So there's a lot of funny parts in this film. That being said, there's a lot of things in this film that just are not that funny. There's a lot of 80s stuff in this film that just doesn't really translate well to me. Like, it's an outdated concept that Danny has to be working for this scholarship. And I'm not saying he shouldn't go to college, because it seems like he had a head on his shoulder, but I don't really like this Danny character because he's sleeping with two women. This guy's not a real likable guy, so I'm not really rooting for him that much. I think the movie's biggest flaw is it's just not that funny. And I'll say this film was the funniest thing, in the certainly the early 80s. And I gotta say that title just doesn't stand up to me. And I gave it another shot. I'd seen it twice now, and I don't think I really want to see this film again. I'll say it's better than Caddyshack 2, and it's possible that because the plots are somewhat similar, and because that film is so bad, that this film is only like a better version of that, but not an amazing version of that. I just don't think the plot is that great, and the jokes aren't that great. So unfortunately for me, I don't think this film stands up as a comedy film. If you haven't seen this film, I wouldn't recommend that you need to take the time to see this film. So it might be very controversial, but that's just the way I felt. What do you think, Al? Does this film stand the test of time?
I have to agree with you, James. I mean, this movie really felt like it was more clever. Like, there were moments where I was like, that's funny. But like, I was thinking the words, "that's funny," and not laughing. And it's supposed to be this hilarious movie that makes you belly laugh. And yeah, there just wasn't a ton of that in this movie for me. And it's not that there's nothing that's funny in there. There is funny stuff. Like you said, there's clever stuff. There's clever gags. Watching Rodney Dangerfield do his shtick, that's great. Watching Chevy Chase do his shtick, sometimes that's okay. Sometimes it can get a little old. I could watch Bill Murray do just about anything and love it, but this isn't my favorite Bill Murray. This is over-the-top caricature Bill Murray. I like Bill Murray better when he's a guy. Like in Groundhog Day, he's a guy who's going through this incredible thing, but he still acts like a regular human being would in that situation. Peter Venkman is a regular guy who lives in a universe where crazy things happen. His characters in Rushmore and Lost in Translation, I just like him better when he's more of a regular dude. To your point about Danny as this not likable character, you're totally right about that. But also more than that, is this movie about the caddies, or is it about the adults, or is it just this kind of hodgepodge of both? Sorry to keep referencing this stupid documentary, but I watched it, so I'm going to talk about it. Harold Ramis said that the movie was originally about the caddies, and that was the focus. And Brian Doyle Murray wrote it about his days when he worked at a golf course. And as it happened, while they were casting this movie, they were able to get these amazing adult actors, Rodney Dangerfield and Chevy Chase and Bill Murray and Ted Knight. And then the story just kind of shifted, and they just kind of gave those guys more attention. And you can understand that, but the story of the caddies kind of gets shoved to the side. And who am I rooting for? What's the story? Like, who do I care about? And really, the only thing that you care about is hating the judge. That's like the universal thing. Everyone hates the judge. He's evil. Okay, fine. I'm going to say that this movie doesn't stand the test of time because I just don't think it deserves this perch of the all-time legendary comedies. It's clever. It's neat. It's worth seeing if you like Rodney Dangerfield, if you like Bill Murray, if you like Harold Ramis. And
if you're in a comedy film course, you need to see this film.
Yeah. I could also see that if you just really love golf, this movie is a must-watch, and you probably quote it all the time on the links. I think that's right? On the links?
Watch Happy Gilmore.
Yeah, valid point. So I'm sorry to my dad and all the other dads out there who are listening who are very disappointed, but I don't think this movie stands the test of time. But next week, we are going to be talking about Goodfellas, the iconic gangster movie. My sister, Samantha Noah, is coming back on the show. She was last on for Harold and Kumar Go to White Castle. We were talking about how this movie was quotable. Goodfellas is a very quotable movie.
Oh, yeah. And then the following week, we're going to follow this up with the comedic, you could almost say the fictionalized sequel to Goodfellas in another universe. That's My Blue Heaven, starring Steve Martin and Rick Moranis.
Right. This is going to be a lot of fun. In the meantime, as always, talk to us at Test of Time Pod. We are on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We love hearing from you. Tell us what you think about Caddyshack, about golfing, about gophers, about Bill Murray. What about Brian Doyle Murray? He's awesome. Let's give some love to Brian Doyle Murray, huh? Let's blow him up on Twitter, shall we? And we'll see you next week, everybody.
Bye.